The silver burns in his hands like molten metal, though the coins are cool to the touch. 30 pieces. That's the price they agreed upon. The value of betrayal. In the gathering dusk of Jerusalem, Judas Iscariot stumbles through twisting streets, each step echoing off ancient stones like accusations. The pouch at his belt feels heavier than it should, as if each silver piece weighs as much as his conscience. Strange how something so light could purchase something so profound. Behind him, in the high priest's courtyard, he can still hear the sounds of questioning. The dull thud of fists against flesh. The murmur of hostile voices. He quickens his pace but cannot outrun the echo of his own words. The one I kiss is the man. A beggar reaches toward him from a shadowed doorway. Judas recoils, the coins clinking together with a sound that turns his stomach. How many times had he counted money as the disciples' treasurer? How many times had Jesus trusted him with their meager wealth? Now different numbers haunt him. 30 pieces, 1 kiss, 3 years of fellowship destroyed in a moment of betrayal. The memory of their first meeting floods back unbidden. The shores of Galilee, the press of the crowd, and Jesus' voice carrying across the water. His words had set Judas's heart ablaze with possibility. Here finally was the Messiah who would drive out the Romans, restore Israel's glory. Judas had left everything to follow him, believing he was part of something world-changing. But gradually doubt had crept in like evening shadows. Jesus spoke of turning the other cheek, of loving enemies, of a kingdom not of this world. Where was the warrior king Judas had expected? Where was the revolution he had been promised? Tonight's meal haunts him most of all. Jesus, kneeling like a common servant, washing the feet of those who followed him. Even Judas's feet. Even knowing what was to come. Those eyes, they had known everything. Yet still Jesus offered bread, shared wine, spoke of covenant and sacrifice. One of you will betray me, he had said. And in that moment, Judas had felt the weight of destiny crushing him. Now he stands before the temple gates, those same feet aching from running. Inside, the priests are probably still congratulating themselves on their victory. They used him and he let them. All his grand justifications, about forcing Jesus to act, about serving some greater purpose, crumble like ashes in his mouth. A scream pierces the night. More questioning, more pain. Judas clutches his head, but he cannot shut out the sounds. The coins slip from his grip, scattering across temple stones with accusing clinks. In the moonlight, they gleam like stars fallen to earth, each one a testimony to his shame. This isn't what he wanted. This isn't what was supposed to happen. But what did he expect? That Jesus would call down angels? That this would somehow end differently than betrayal always ends? The moon rises over Jerusalem's walls, casting harsh shadows. In its light, Judas sees his own shadow stretching before him, distorted, monstrous. Is this what he's become? Is this what he always was? He gathers the scattered coins with trembling hands. Perhaps there's still time. Perhaps he can return the money, stop what he's set in motion. But even as the thought forms, he knows some bells cannot be unrung. Some kisses cannot be untaken. Some choices mark us forever. The night grows deeper as Judas Iscariot, once disciple, now betrayer, begins his final journey through Jerusalem's streets. He doesn't know it yet, but his path will lead him past mercy to despair, past redemption to tragedy. The coins weigh heavy in his purse, each piece a reminder of the price of betrayal. Not just of Jesus, but of everything he once believed in. And somewhere in the distance, a rooster crows. The memory comes to him now, sharp as a blade, that first day by the Sea of Galilee, when hope still burned bright. The air had tasted of salt and possibility. Fishing boats dotted the water like scattered seeds, and the crowd pressed forward, hungry for something more than bread. Judas had stood at the edges then, watching. A Judean among Galileans, he'd felt the difference like a wall between himself and the others. But when Jesus spoke, those walls crumbled. "Follow me," he had said, and Judas did, leaving behind his carefully ordered life for something that seemed greater. Those early days gleamed with promise. Judas watched Jesus turn water to wine at Cana, saw him heal the sick, feed thousands with a boy's lunch. Each miracle strengthened his conviction. This was the Messiah, the one who would restore Israel. When Jesus appointed him treasurer of their small band, pride had swelled in his chest. Finally, someone recognized his talents, his education, his worth. But doubt, like rot, starts small. It began with whispers in the marketplace. "Your master eats with sinners," they said. He speaks against the temple. Judas would defend Jesus, but each accusation left a mark. Why did Jesus waste time with tax collectors and prostitutes when revolution waited? Why talk of loving enemies when Rome's boot pressed on Israel's neck? The day Mary poured expensive perfume on Jesus' feet, something broke inside him. This could have been sold, given to the poor, he had protested, watching a year's wages drip onto dirty floors. But his concern wasn't for the poor. It was for the money box he carried, for the coins he had begun to slip into his own purse when no one watched. "The poor you will always have with you," Jesus had replied. Those knowing eyes seeing straight through him, the same eyes that watched him at every meal, every gathering, until Judas could hardly bear their weight. Jerusalem changed everything. They entered the city to shouts of "Hosanna!" Palm branches carpeted the streets. Surely now, Judas thought, surely now he will claim his crown. But Jesus spoke only of death, of servants becoming greatest by becoming least. In the temple court, watching Jesus overturn the money changers' tables, Judas felt his dreams of glory overturn with them. The chief priests found him in this state of mind, ripe as fallen fruit. Their words dripped honey. "You're a reasonable man, Judas. You understand how things work. Help us protect the peace. Help us save Israel from Roman retaliation." 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave's life, they told him. A small price to pay for peace, for maintaining order, for forcing God's hand. Standing in their marble halls, watching lamplight glint off polished floors, Judas had felt important again, needed, part of something bigger than a band of homeless wanderers. This was politics, power, the real work of building God's kingdom. Or so he told himself. Now in Jerusalem's darkening streets, those justifications taste like vinegar in his mouth. Each step takes him further from the man he was, closer to what he's become. The weight of the money pouch matches the weight in his chest. 30 pieces of silver pulling him down, down, into shadows deeper than night. Behind him, the temple rises like a mountain of marble and gold. Before him stretches a path he never meant to walk. And all around him, the city prepares for Passover, unaware that tomorrow's sacrifice will be different from all that came before. The sun sets over Jerusalem's western wall. In upper rooms across the city, families gather for the festival meal. Soon, in one of those rooms, 13 men will share bread for the last time. And Judas's path to betrayal will reach its bitter end. The upper room glows amber in the lamplight. Outside, Jerusalem prepares for Passover. But in here, time seems to hold its breath. 13 men recline around a low table, the familiar scents of lamb, bitter herbs, and wine mingling with the weight of unspoken words. Judas shifts on his cushion, the money pouch heavy against his hip. He's chosen his place carefully, not too close to Jesus, not too far, close enough to maintain appearances, far enough to avoid those eyes that seem to read his soul. The silver burns against his skin through the leather, a constant reminder of what's to come. Jesus rises from his place and Judas tenses, expecting what? Accusation, confrontation. Instead, Jesus removes his outer garment and wraps a towel around his waist. The other disciples exchange confused glances as their master pours water into a basin. "Surely not my feet, Lord," Peter protests when Jesus kneels before him. The rough fisherman's feet are calloused, dirty from Jerusalem's streets. But Jesus insists, and soon water splashes on the floor, mixed with the sound of uncomfortable shifting and cleared throats. Judas watches, his heart pounding harder with each disciple Jesus serves. He considers fleeing, making some excuse. But then Jesus stands before him, basin in hand, and time stops. Their eyes meet. In Jesus' gaze, Judas sees everything. Knowledge of what's coming, sorrow, and something else that makes his throat close. Love. "The one who has bathed needs only to wash his feet," Jesus says, his hands gentle as he works. The water is warm, soothing. For a moment, Judas almost breaks, almost confesses everything. But the coins shift against his leg and the moment passes. The meal proceeds. Wine is poured, bread is broken. They've shared 100 meals like this, but tonight feels different. Heavier. Even the usual banter between disciples sounds forced, as if they sense the gathering storm. Then Jesus speaks the words that shatter the pretense. "Truly I say to you, one of you will betray me." The room erupts. "Is it I, Lord?" The question bounces from disciple to disciple, each man's voice carrying its own note of fear and disbelief. Judas stays silent, studying the bread in his hands until he feels the weight of waiting eyes. "Surely not I, Rabbi?" The words taste like ash in his mouth. He uses the formal title, not Lord like the others, and sees understanding flicker in Jesus' face. "You have said so," Jesus replies softly. Then louder, "What you're going to do quickly." The other disciples assume Jesus is sending him on an errand, to buy supplies, to give something to the poor. None of them understand the real meaning hidden in those words. None of them see how Judas's hands shake as he rises from the table, At the door, he pauses. Behind him, Jesus is speaking of covenant, of body broken and blood shed. The familiar words of blessing float in the air. Take, eat, drink of it, all of you. Judas steps into the night. The contrast between the warm room and the cold street hits him like a physical blow. Below, Jerusalem's streets are alive with Passover preparations. Somewhere in the city, guards are waiting. Torches are being lit. Plans are being set in motion that can no longer be stopped. He begins walking, each step taking him further from the light of that upper room. The taste of bread and wine lingers on his tongue, his last meal as a disciple, though he doesn't know it yet. Above him, stars wheel in an indifferent sky. And in the distance, Gethsemane's olive trees wait in darkness. Behind him, in that lamplit room, Jesus continues teaching those who remained. Before him lies a garden, a kiss, and a betrayal that will echo through history. And all around him, the holy city prepares for a Passover unlike any before. One where the lamb to be sacrificed is the Son of God himself. Torchlight flickers against ancient olive trees, casting writhing shadows on gnarled trunks. The Garden of Gethsemane, usually a place of peace, has become a stage set for betrayal. Judas leads a column of temple guards through the night, their sandals crunching on gravel, weapons clinking with each step. He knows where to find Jesus. How many nights had they spent here in prayer? How many quiet conversations under these same trees? The memory catches in his throat like olive pits. The one I kiss is the man, he had told them. A kiss, the greeting of a friend, a student, a son, now twisted into a signal for arrest. The irony tastes bitter as gall. They hear the disciples before they see them. Peter's snoring carries through the garden, along with the softer breathing of James and John. Judas feels a flash of anger. How can they sleep tonight of all nights? But then he sees Jesus. Moonlight catches the sheen of sweat on Jesus' face. He's still on his knees, prayer barely finished, and something about his posture makes Judas falter. The guards behind him shuffle impatiently. Their torches cast his shadow long and dark across the garden floor, reaching toward Jesus like an accusation. Jesus stands. Even now, there's a dignity about him that makes the armed men step back. His eyes meet Judas's, and in them is not the anger Judas expected, but a sadness so deep it steals his breath. "Friend," Jesus says, and the word cuts deeper than any blade, "do what you came for." Judas steps forward. The distance between them seems infinite and too short all at once. His feet move as if through water, each step heavy with the weight of prophecy and choice. The silver at his belt seems to grow heavier with each stride. The kiss, when it comes, is gentle. A brushing of cheeks, a moment of contact that will haunt Judas until his dying day. He feels Jesus' beard against his skin, smells the lingering scent of wine and bread from their last meal together. "Rabbi," Judas whispers, and his voice cracks on the word. Then the garden erupts into chaos. Guards surge forward. Peter's sword flashes in the torchlight, and blood spatters the olive trees as the high priest's servant falls, clutching his ear. But Jesus remains calm, healing even as they bind him. "Put your sword away," he commands Peter. "Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" Judas backs away, the coins clinking softly with each step. The guards are rough as they seize Jesus, but he offers no resistance. Instead, he looks at the armed crowd and asks, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come with swords and clubs? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching, and you did not arrest me." The words hang in the air like smoke. Everyone there knows the answer. They came at night because they feared the crowds. They came with weapons because they feared one man's truth. They came following a betrayer because they couldn't face him directly. As they lead Jesus away, Judas stands rooted in the garden. The torches recede, taking their light with them, leaving him alone in darkness broken only by patches of moonlight filtering through olive leaves. The same trees that witnessed countless prayers now stand witness to history's most famous betrayal. A breeze stirs the branches, and for a moment, it sounds like weeping. Or maybe it's Judas himself who weeps, though he won't realize it until he tastes salt on his lips. The 30 pieces of silver weigh heavier than ever, each coin a measure of shame. In the distance, Jerusalem sleeps, unaware that this night will be remembered for all time. The temple guards march their prisoner through empty streets. And in a garden that was once paradise, now stained by a kiss, Judas Iscariot begins to understand the full measure of what he's done. Dawn is still hours away, but for Judas the night has only begun. Ahead lies remorse sharper than any sword, regret deeper than any wound. The kiss still burns on his lips like a brand, marking him forever as the man who betrayed God with a gesture of love. Morning breaks over Jerusalem like a wound, staining the sky blood red. Judas hasn't slept. How could he? The sounds of Jesus' trial echo through the city. The shouts, the mockery, the crack of the lash. Each blow feels like it's falling on his own flesh. He paces the temple courts, the coins now a poison in his purse. News reaches him in fragments. The Sanhedrin's verdict, Pilate's reluctant involvement, the growing crowds calling for crucifixion. This isn't what he wanted. This isn't what was supposed to happen. I have sinned, he chokes out when he finally gains audience with the chief priests. The words scrape his throat like shards of pottery. I have betrayed innocent blood. The priests regard him with cold eyes. These men who were so eager to conspire with him yesterday now look through him as if he's already a ghost. Their response cuts deeper than contempt. What is that to us? That's your responsibility. Responsibility. The word echoes in his skull like hammer blows. He tears the money pouch from his belt, hurls the silver across the temple floor. The coins scatter like drops of mercury, spinning and ringing against marble. A few roll to rest against the priest's feet, but they step back as if from contamination. Blood money, one mutters. Blood money. The words follow Judas as he staggers out into the street. The morning sun is too bright, too harsh. It illuminates every crack in the walls, every sin in his soul. Passers-by hurry past, drawn to the growing commotion at Pilate's palace. Someone mentions a crown of thorns. Someone else describes Jesus' face, beaten beyond recognition. Each detail is a nail in Judas's heart. He wanders the city's streets like a man dreaming, but there's no waking from this nightmare. Every turn brings new torment. Here's the upper room where they shared their last meal. There's the garden path that led to betrayal. Even the olive trees seem to accuse him. A rope dangles from his belt now, replacing the purse of coins. When did he get it? He can't remember. But its rough texture against his palm feels like destiny. Or maybe it's just the only path left to a man who's betrayed God. He finds himself climbing, up through the city's heights, past watching windows and curious eyes. The ground falls away below him. The same sun that watched his betrayal now illuminates his despair. From here, he can see the hill where they'll raise the cross. Already, crowds are gathering. I have betrayed innocent blood. The words are different now. Not a confession, but an epitaph. The rope feels heavy in his hands. As heavy as 30 pieces of silver. As heavy as guilt, as heavy as history. Jerusalem spreads below him, indifferent to one man's despair. In the temple, priests are already discussing what to do with his discarded silver. They'll buy a field, a burial ground for foreigners. It will be called the Field of Blood, though Judas won't live to hear that name. The sun climbs higher. Below, a procession begins. Jesus carrying his cross through streets Judas will never walk again. But Judas doesn't see it. His path leads elsewhere, up into the lonely heights where even birds fear to nest. His last thought before the rope goes taut is of a kiss in a garden, of eyes filled with love even in the moment of betrayal, of mercy he couldn't accept, forgiveness he couldn't imagine. Then there is only silence. But Jerusalem's day is not done. As Judas's body sways in the morning wind, the sky begins to darken. Storm clouds gather over Golgotha, and on a cross he helped raise, Jesus speaks words Judas will never hear. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. In the field of blood, poppies now grow. They spring up between graves of strangers, their red petals bright against Jerusalem's dusty soil. 30 pieces of silver bought this land, a potter's field turned burial ground. Even the earth here tells Judas's story. History moves on. Jerusalem falls. Empires rise and crumble. But the story of the kiss remains, whispered in countless languages, pondered by generations. Each telling adds another layer to the tragedy. Judas, the disciple who walked with God and chose darkness. The man who sold heaven for silver. But in quiet moments, between the tellings, questions linger like morning mist. What drove him? The Gospels speak of Satan entering his heart. But when did the door first crack open? Was it gradual, like water wearing away stone? Or sudden, like a building's collapse after years of hidden decay? They found his body on the same day darkness covered Jerusalem. While Jesus hung on the cross, Judas's lifeless form swayed in the wind. 2 deaths marking the same hours. One brought life to the world, the other stands as a warning across centuries. In the years that followed, stories multiplied. Some said his body burst open when it fell, spilling his guilt onto the very land his blood money bought. Others whispered that he wandered as a restless spirit, forever reliving that moment in the garden. But the truth was both simpler and more profound. Judas died as he lived, torn between heaven and earth, unable to grasp the mercy that might have saved him. Consider Peter, who also denied his Lord. 3 times before the rooster crowed, he swore he never knew Jesus. But Peter's tears led to redemption, while Judas's led to despair. The difference lay not in their sins, but in their response to grace. The tragedy of Judas is not that he sinned, but that he couldn't imagine forgiveness. The same Jesus who healed the sick, who forgave his executioners, who restored Peter to fellowship, would he not have forgiven Judas too? But Judas never asked. Like his silver scattered on the temple floor, he cast away hope before it could take root. Now, 2,000 years later, his name has become synonymous with betrayal. Yet his story serves a purpose beyond cautionary tale. In Judas, we see ourselves, our capacity for self-deception, our struggle between light and darkness, our tendency to substitute religious observation for true faith. The coins that bought his infamy have long since disappeared, melted down, or lost to time. The rope that ended his life has returned to dust. But the kiss, that gesture of intimate betrayal, echoes still. It reminds us that the greatest dangers to faith often come not from outside, but from within. From allowing disappointment to breed bitterness. From choosing what we think God should do over what he actually does. In the end, Judas's story is not just about betrayal. It's about the breadth of God's mercy and the tragedy of those who cannot accept it. It's about the fine line between following Jesus and using him for our own ends. It's about the choice we all face, to trust in grace or to carry our guilt alone. The sun sets over Jerusalem's walls, casting long shadows across the field of blood. Somewhere in the city, gatherings of faithful still break bread and share wine, remembering another meal long ago. They speak of resurrection, of hope, of forgiveness freely given. And in their midst, Judas's empty seat stands as both warning and invitation. Warning of the pride that transforms disciples into betrayers. Invitation to accept the mercy he rejected. His story, tragic as it is, testifies to a love so vast, it could have embraced even the one who betrayed it. If only he had turned back. If only he had asked. If only he had believed grace could reach even him. The poppies in the field of blood sway in the evening breeze. Their red petals catch the last light like drops of blood, like scattered silver, like tears of regret. They remind us that from the soil of our greatest failures, God can still bring forth life, if we let him. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. If you want to see more videos, hit the subscribe button. And if you have something to say, please leave a comment.